take care of them right through, whether they come for LSCS, whether they come for labor analgesia, non-obstetric surgery like acute appendicitis, acute cholecystectomy, it could be trauma, or it could be a septic mother. We saw many women come in COVID sepsis, dengue sepsis, there are viral. So there are multiple reasons why as anesthetists and ICU doctors and pain doctors, we actually deal with obstetric patients. So we need to know that how they work and when they actually fall off the cliff and become sick. So there are multiple changes, why they happen, how, when, and do we act or should we watch? So what are the adaptations, and that's what we're going to see. So as an anesthetist, our goal is to make sure the mother is well. If the mother is well, the baby is well. I think that's the bottom line. So you make sure mother's oxygenation is good, her acid base is good, her uteroplacental circulation is good, because only when that blood pressure is good, her baby is going to be fine, especially if we are doing fetal procedures and mid-trimester procedures. Why is that? Because uteroplacental circulation does not have any auto-regulation. Are you all aware of this? Which other organ does not have auto-regulation? No, you're all saying God, I'm postprandial, don't ask me questions. Yeah, so what do you mean when I say there is no auto-regulation? Kidney has auto-regulation, right? So if we don't supply enough, there is no mechanism by which the uterus can adjust the blood flow or increase the pumping or do things like that, like in any other vital organ does. So we need to ensure the mother is adequately filled and she has an adequate blood pressure to make sure mother and fetus are well. And only then you get a good fetal outcome. At the end of the day, both the mother and baby have to go home safe. So we need to keep an eye on oxygenation, the acid base status, maintain a homeostasis that you learned in your first year of physiology, yeah, and ensure blood pressure. So those are the three things, very easy, right? This is all we are going to do for every mother who comes through the door. So what are the things that can happen? So what are the things that can happen? There could be anatomical changes. She's getting bigger because of the hormones. The body expands, the relaxin hormone and the skeletal-muscular changes happen to accommodate the baby, right? Those are the anatomical changes that are going to happen, because if she's the same size, she can't accommodate. What are the physiological changes? We are going to look at it in detail for every system, and henceforth, how does she differ clinically? How do we identify her? And why do these things happen? Yeah, primarily it's all hormones, right? Women equals hormones. You have estrogen, progesterone and the relaxin, and these hormones trigger further hypothalamo-pituitary axis, and they further cause changes in every endocrine system, every cardiovascular, respiratory, skeletal-muscular, spine, CNS and renal. So bottom line is hormonal changes plus the demand. There is a baby growing inside, right? So a lot of you might have pets. You might see your dog giving birth and how the dog starts behaving through the pregnancy and what happens. So every mother goes through a lot of hassle. You know, it is not about mourning or mood swings. This is much more than that. She's giving rise to a new life and the body has to go through. And the uterine enlargement and anatomical changes. Actually, what they say is, whether she's coming for labor analgesia or fetal distress or an acute sick mother, bottom line is you need to know physiology, and when the physiology turns to pathology. So this could be somebody in first trimester. As the baby grows, all the other organs are squashed, the chest is compressed, there's very little space for the lung to actually expand, and the baby actually occupies. The digestion can be an issue. She could have acute acid reflux, and as you see, there's a posture change. The spine has actually changed. The center of gravity has changed. So she is actually carrying that weight and walking. So we need to watch for everything like positioning, how she sits, how we put her on the table, how we actually position for spinal and henceforth. So this was a Danish study that was done to say that pregnancy itself is a stress test for life. This was way back in 2006, if I'm not wrong. Then a recent study said the changes that happen to 40 weeks are actually equal to what a person who trains for marathon for 40 weeks actually undergoes. How much stress on the heart, how much stress on the lung, how much stress on the metabolic demand. So it's like actually going on the treadmill. So you can imagine the amount of changes and what all a woman actually has to go through, and she still does it with the hope that she's going to go home with a beautiful baby, and we need to take care of her. So first and foremost is the body weight and composition, which is the obvious pregnancy change. You're expected to gain weight up to 10 to 12 kilos through the 3 trimesters, which is about 17%, and which is a hormone related to fluid retention and weight gain, your renin-angiotensin system. So when this gets activated, the fluid retention, and this is done for a particular reason. So there is more fluid available, the body expands, there is vasodilatation, and there is more good blood supply to all the organs. So everything has a reason, and that is why it happens. So half of the expansion is plasma, the rest of it is the fetus, uterus, fat, everything else. And the learning point is, if it is more than this, there is something abnormal. It could be just that she's getting more obese, she could be diabetic, she could be pre-eclamptic. So if there is an acute weight gain, say she says, in the last 2 days I've become all tight, the bangles have become tight, the legs are tight, I can't breathe, the abdomen is also swollen, the back is swollen, then you've got to investigate if something more is wrong. She could be having preeclampsia, she could be having cardiac failure, you need to check on her. So the changes are because of RAS stimulation leading to fluid and salt retention, progesterone which tries to maintain the sodium and potassium levels, and the estrogen which causes fluid. So this is how the fluid balance, which is our primary first basis of life, the water balance is maintained. But if it goes wrong, especially if it's polyhydramnios, twins or hypertensives, we need to be very cautious with the fluids. So that is your learning point when it comes to the body fluid composition in pregnant women. Anatomical changes, as we saw in the first picture, the chest expands to accommodate, the diaphragm is elevated, spine changes happen with a shift in the gravity. Okay, there is a change in the curve and there is more lordosis as the baby size increases. So this you have to be taking into consideration when you are positioning them either lateral or sitting for spinal. When it comes to airway, there are anatomical changes can happen, like edematous, they could be having a short neck, they could have large breasts, so they could actually be a difficult airway. So this, every pregnant patient, like what Dr. Azhar mentioned, every pediatric patient could potentially be a difficult one because of large tongue. Likewise, every obstetric patient could be difficult because you don't know until you look inside how much of edema is inside. Nasal airway may be a problem because they can have engorged mucous membranes. So you need to be checking on that care. Attention to care is what matters in every way that we look. So ventilation, actually when they have increased abdominal circumference, they have a reduced chest circumference, therefore ventilation is a problem. So they actually increase the respiratory rate and the tidal volume to actually accommodate. And when we are taking it over, in case of giving a GA, you need to bear this in mind and not hyperventilate them, but bear in mind to make sure appropriate gases are maintained. Yeah, you all still with me? Is it interesting? Okay. So this is another picture that you can actually shows how this is going to work, no? So airway, you can have edema, friability, try not to harm the airway, get a smaller size tube, make sure you use bougie or assistance help so we don't traumatize the airway, because you need to extubate them at the end of the procedure. So make sure you don't traumatize. Okay, the volumes may change. The main thing we are worried about is a decreased functional residual capacity because of the elevation of the diaphragm, and this is very, very important because you don't have any reserve oxygen. There is no reserve gases. Henceforth, we need to make sure the pre-oxygenation is done adequately. You remember the time constant that Sir mentioned about? You have to ensure that the oxygen is fully given for 3 minutes to fill all of the bronchi and alveoli, so that in the apneic period, we don't have a hypoxia. Even the smallest hypoxia, because this woman I just said she's preparing for marathon, she's exhausted all her resources. You cannot waste 3 minutes of hypoxia, her brain will be dead and baby will be dead, right? So you want to be adequately pre-oxygenating a pregnant woman if at all you're going to intubate her for any reason, or if she's hypoxic because she's septic, make sure you give her 100% oxygen. That is the first and foremost thing you're going to do. Okay? So these are the changes. I'll skip this one. So what is very important is, I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the oxygen dissociation curve, which allows for oxygen delivery, increased oxygen delivery to happen at the placental tissue level, because the demand is there at the baby site, right? So the more the mother works, the oxygen goes from the lung and the oxygen gets delivered at the fetal end. That is done by the increased respiratory work that is happening. Reduced FRC is the significant part, and that the vital capacity is not changed. Your volumes change, the rate change, but the capacity is still what is appropriate for her age, height and weight. Okay, but in labor, which is actually a very significant work that is done, there is a phenomenal increase in metabolic demand, oxygen consumption, and the minute volume can actually increase to up to 140%. So if somebody had any underlying cardiac or any other problem in the heart or lung that allows them not to do this, this is when they will compromise if you've got any undiagnosed disease. So if you get called to labor room that immediately after delivery or delivery they collapse, or they have pulmonary edema, or the patient is gone into failure, you know that this is been the most stressful thing that the woman has done, and there is increased work, and henceforth she's pushed the stove on. So you need to be aware of this. Give some oxygen and take over the breathing. So airway wise, so what would you do if you had a woman? You make sure the airway, GA for obstetrics, once you become a little bit more experienced, you will be taught on in detail. But the most important thing to remember is she could be a potential difficult airway, so you need a difficult airway card and a senior anesthetist with you for help in the initial days. Oxygenation and pre-oxygenation are very, very important. Avoid anything that will cause reduced oxygen delivery, like hypotension, hypovolemia, hypothermia, acidosis, infections, any of this that might cause reduced oxygen delivery should be avoided. Okay, so preparing for a GA is a whole different thing, and I think we are not in the scope of that in this talk, so I'm going to skip that. So look how this heart is pumping. You know, the pregnant woman's heart is going to pump much, much faster. So this is a normal size heartbeat. So you see that the bottom three, what is cardiac output? What is the formula for cardiac output? Heart rate times stroke volume. So in pregnant women, we are going to increase the heart rate steadily through the 3 trimesters and increase the stroke volume so that they have a phenomenal increase of 45 to 50% increase in cardiac output by term. And why do they do this? As we said before, the uterine blood supply does not have auto-regulation. Only if the mother pumps, it's going to go to the baby. So it's very, very important that she prepares herself to pump this much to the baby. Okay, so that is why we've had a decreased SVR, lot of blood volume and plasma volume, a relative anemia, and we actually try to push this volume as much as she can into the baby. These are the changes that happen over the period of time through the first, second and third. So you have blood flow that increases to all the organs, and if you look at the uterine blood flow, if you imagine after C-section, you look at the uterus, there will be blood pumping out. If there is a PPH mother in labor room, there will be blood pumping out. That's because per minute she can have up to 1 to 1.5 liter per minute. If the uterus goes into atony, or if there is a tear, or if there is a DIC, that's it. In few minutes you can lose the mother. So that is why it's very, very important to actively manage postpartum hemorrhage or antepartum hemorrhage. It's important that the surgical control is obtained, and it's also important that we replace the volume and get blood as and when it is necessary. So this is what we were talking about, the cardiac output, and it takes 20 to 24 hours to return to pre-labor value and up to 24 weeks for the pre-pregnancy values. So remember, all of these changes take time. It's not like the next day after delivery she is back to square one and she can be up and about. The body takes time to get back. So give respect. Things can still go wrong and she needs the time and space to get up and get ready. So we need to prepare her mentally for that. So one more important thing is the colloid pressures, the ratio can be altered, which means that they can actually have an increased capillary permeability, increased propensity for pulmonary edema, especially in susceptible women like obese, diabetic, preeclampsia and septic mothers. So we need to be cautious about how we transfuse fluids and bear this in mind when they have a trouble. So anybody looked at ECG, in abnormal ECGs in pregnant women? Have you auscultated a pregnant woman? They don't do that in OG wards, right? Okay, you should. You're an anesthetist. Always carry a step. Always listen to the patient's chest. Make sure air entry is there. Encourage them to do deep breathing. You will find that the heart rate is increased. You may have a flow murmur because of hyperdynamic circulation. You may have some ECG changes. Initially shift in the axis because as we said, the heart is doing a lot of work. But if there are additional changes like new arrhythmia, LAFB, if there is a LVH, when you have hypertrophic changes, then there may be something more in this and you may want to check a echo in case we are missing something in this mother. Or if she is symptomatic like persistent tachycardia, persistent shortness of breath at rest or even mild exertion, or if there is chest pain and things like that, you need to check. So we need to know what are the normal ECGs. You see a lot of them to recognize the abnormal ones. Yeah? Are we okay with this part? The most significant thing that all anesthetists, the only one thing that obstetricians are ever worried about is supine hypotension. So this is similar to, what is the concept? A large bump sitting on the IVC, allowing not the venous return to go back to the heart, and henceforth where every positional change, not all women, about 15 to 20% of the women, especially if they are underfilled, can immediately reduce the cardiac output, can have a drop in blood pressure, sometimes may be very significant, they can collapse. That is the point. So this is something that you should really remember in mind. So uteroplacental circulation, this is what we mentioned. These changes that we talk about in pregnancy, where the spiral arteries enlarge to allow for blood circulation, should be important. And these are the drugs that may affect, and as and when you practice, it's very important for you to know that which drugs affect the uteroplacental circulation and what should be given and what should be not. There's a physiological anemia and relative thrombocytopenia, and we need to watch, especially if there is a PPH, as I mentioned, replacing volume is very important. Coagulation, there's a propensity for more hypercoagulable state. Even though the body tries to protect, right? You don't want to bleed, you try to contract, but it can have a mismatch, and henceforth you need to know what factors go up and down. Spinal, I think that's the most important thing that we are worried about. The space may be reduced, you may want a lesser dose. Compared to the same height woman coming for an orthopedic procedure, you'll be giving a smaller dose in spinal. So, aspiration risk, as we said, increased diaphragmatic effect, and they may have hormonal changes. Any mismatch can actually cause problems in the pregnancy. So I'm going to skip all of the drugs because we don't have time for that right now. But what is very important is every drug has a side effect, that which crosses the placenta and that which not. So when you're learning your drugs, there is a little column that says in pregnancy, with caution, without caution, and it's very important that you learn what are the drugs. Again, painkillers, make sure the mother is comfortable, use appropriate pain relief. If they are pregnant early on, maybe NSAIDs are worth avoiding, but other than that, keep them safe. Regional as much as possible, but every other drug in moderation is good. Keep them pain-free. Okay, so in summary, there are very complex changes that happen. It may seem like every woman does it, so what, but no. So take caution, it sometimes can get pathological. Maintain your airway, breathing and circulation. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, madam. In a very short time, you have given an elaborate lecture. Thank you. It is very useful for students. Thank you, madam.